Did you know that some of the most extraordinary women in history defied the rules of their time and changed the world forever? The Bible is filled with inspiring examples of women who faced impossible challenges, overcame prejudice, and proved that with God, anything is possible. Here's a question for you. How many times have you felt like life was putting limits on you? Imagine finding inspiration in women who transformed not just their own lives, but also the history of the world. These women trusted God, challenged the norms of their time, and showed that when we have courage and faith, the impossible becomes possible. In today's video, we'll dive into the stories of 5 extraordinary women from the Bible who broke every barrier, defied expectations, and demonstrated that God can use anyone to fulfill his purposes. From Rahab, a prostitute who saved a nation, to Mary Magdalene, the first witness to Christ's resurrection, these stories will inspire you to believe in God's power and the purpose he has for your life. Stay with me until the end, because you'll discover practical and profound lessons that can transform how you face challenges and see life. And before we begin, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs an extra dose of inspiration and faith. Are you ready to discover what these amazing women have to teach us? Then let's begin. Imagine living in a society where you are constantly judged, despised, and seen as someone without value. This was Rahab's reality, a woman who, because of her profession as a prostitute, was marginalized in the city of Jericho. But what makes her special is not the label society gave her, but rather her courage and her unshakable faith in the God of Israel, a God she didn't even fully know yet. Rahab lived in Jericho, a city surrounded by gigantic walls, considered an impenetrable fortress. At that time, the people of Israel, led by Joshua, were about to conquer the Promised Land, and Jericho was their next target. To prepare for the battle, Joshua sent 2 spies to scout the city. And it was in Rahab's house, in the middle of her reality, that these spies found shelter. Now think about this. What did Rahab have to lose by hiding the spies? Literally everything. If the authorities of Jericho discovered her actions, she would be condemned as a traitor and likely executed. But Rahab did something extraordinary. She chose to risk her life to help these men, trusting in their God. When the soldiers of Jericho came knocking on Rahab's door in search of the spies, she deceived them, saying the men had already left. Meanwhile, the spies were hidden on her rooftop under bundles of flax. Rahab demonstrated extraordinary boldness in doing this, but what truly stands out is her declaration of faith. She said to the spies, "I know that the Lord has given you this land and that the terror of you has fallen upon us. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath." Joshua 2:9-11. Take note, Rahab wasn't an Israelite. She hadn't grown up learning about the God of Israel. Yet even so, she recognized that their God was the one true God. And this initial faith was what led her to make a bold decision that would change the course of her life: the covenant of protection and the scarlet cord. In return for her help, Rahab asked that her family be spared when the Israelites attacked the city. The spies made a pact with her, saying that if she hung a scarlet cord in her window, her house would be spared. The scarlet cord is a powerful symbol of salvation and protection, pointing to the redemption God offers to those who trust him. When the walls of Jericho finally fell through divine intervention, Rahab's house, marked by the scarlet cord, remained standing, protecting not only her, but also her entire family. But here's what's even more incredible. Rahab's story doesn't end with her physical salvation. God honored her faith in a way few could imagine. Rahab married Salmon, a man of Israel, and together they had a son named Boaz, and Boaz later became the great-grandfather of King David. This means that Rahab, a prostitute from Jericho, became part of the lineage of Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world. Lessons from Rahab for us. Rahab is a powerful example that God doesn't look at our past, but at our faith and the choices we make in the present. Here are some practical lessons we can take from her story. Faith transforms any story. It doesn't matter what you've done or where you've been. Your faith in God has the power to completely change your destiny. Just as Rahab was redeemed, you can be too. Bold decisions have lasting impact. Rahab's choice didn't just save her life, it impacted generations. Think, what decisions can you make today that will bless your family and future generations? God uses the unlikely. Rahab was the last person anyone would expect God to use, but God chose her to play a key role in his redemptive story. This shows that God can use anyone willing to trust him. Reflection. Rahab's story challenges us to look beyond our limitations and believe that God can do something extraordinary through us. If he could use Rahab, he can use you too. Have you ever thought about how an act of faith could completely transform your life and your family's? Write in the comments what Rahab's story means to you and how it inspires you to act with greater faith and courage. Now imagine a society completely dominated by men, where women had virtually no voice or role of prominence. It is in this context that Deborah emerges, an extraordinary woman chosen by God to be a judge, prophetess, and leader of Israel. The people of Israel were living through one of the darkest periods in their history. After turning away from God, they fell under the brutal oppression of Jabin, king of Canaan, and his feared general Sisera, who commanded a powerful army equipped with 900 iron chariots, the most advanced military technology of the time. For 20 years, the people of Israel suffered under this oppression until they cried out to God for deliverance, and God responded. But instead of choosing a man to lead Israel's liberation, he chose Deborah, once again proving that he does not conform to human standards and prejudices. Deborah's role as a leader. Deborah was not just a judge in the legal sense. She was also a prophetess who heard directly from God and conveyed his instructions to the people. In a time of spiritual and moral chaos, Deborah was a beacon of hope and guidance for Israel. God gave Deborah a clear message. It was time to free Israel. She summoned Barak, the military commander of Israel, and said, "Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you? Go, gather your men at Mount Tabor, and I will give Sisera into your hand." Judges 4:6-7. However, Barak hesitated. He said he would only go into battle if Deborah went with him. Now think about this. Deborah was not a warrior. She had no military training, but she had something Barak lacked, an unshakable faith in the Almighty God. Deborah agreed to go, but made a surprising prophecy. "Certainly I will go with you, but because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." Judges 4:9. And so, Deborah led Barak and the army of Israel in one of the most improbable and victorious battles in biblical history. The victory under Deborah's leadership. When the Israelite army, numerically inferior and technologically disadvantaged, faced Sisera's forces, God intervened supernaturally. A violent storm flooded the battlefield, rendering Sisera's iron chariots useless. The Canaanite army was completely defeated, and Sisera fled on foot. Now here's the incredible detail. Deborah's prophecy was fulfilled literally. The final blow to Sisera didn't come from Barak, but from a woman named Jael, who killed him with a tent peg. Deborah proved that the true strength of a leader does not lie in weapons or titles, but in faith and obedience to God. She inspired the entire nation of Israel to rise up and fight, showing that with God, even the impossible can be achieved. Deborah, a source of inspiration. Deborah not only led in battle, but also wrote one of the oldest songs in the Bible, the Song of Deborah, recorded in Judges 5. This song is a powerful testimony to God's faithfulness and the decisive role women play in the story of redemption. In reading the song, we see Deborah's gratitude to God and her courage in celebrating the role she and Jael played in Israel's liberation. She didn't seek glory for herself, but gave all the credit to God. Lessons from Deborah for us. God chooses unexpected leaders. Deborah was called to lead in a context where women were seen as inferior. This shows us that God does not look at human standards, but at hearts willing to obey. Courage and faith inspire. Others, Barak hesitated, but Deborah's courage inspired him to act. Sometimes our courage can be exactly what someone close to us needs to move forward. Lead with humility. Despite her prominent position, Deborah always gave glory to God, showing that true leadership is rooted in humility and service to others. Reflection: Deborah teaches us that when we make ourselves available to God, He can use us to fulfill plans greater than we ever imagined. No matter the size of the challenge or the limitations the world imposes on us, with faith and courage, we can lead others to victory in God. Do you believe God can use you to lead in difficult times? Share in the comments how you feel called to inspire or lead in your life. Hannah is one of the most moving and inspiring characters in the Bible. Her story is a journey of pain, fervent prayer, and the demonstration of God's power to turn even the hardest moments into a testimony of victory. In ancient times, one of the greatest achievements for a woman was to be a mother. Having children was not only a matter of personal fulfillment, but also of social status and even financial security. However, Hannah faced an obstacle that seemed insurmountable. She was barren, and as if that weren't enough, she constantly endured humiliation from Peninnah, the other wife of her husband, Elkanah. Imagine Hannah's pain, the deep desire to be a mother combined with Peninnah's daily insults. But what makes Hannah special is not her pain. It's how she chose to deal with it. Instead of revolting or seeking revenge, Hannah decided to run to God in prayer, a humiliated but not defeated woman. Hannah was married to Elkanah, who loved her deeply, but that didn't protect her from Peninnah's constant attacks. Peninnah, who had children, used this as a weapon to humiliate Hannah, provoking her year after year, especially during temple sacrifices. The Bible describes Hannah as someone deeply troubled in spirit. She wept, fasted, and seemed inconsolable. But in the midst of her pain, Hannah did something that many of us sometimes forget to do. She poured out her heart completely before God. She went to the temple, where she prayed with such intensity that she seemed drunk. Even the priest Eli rebuked her, thinking she had been drinking. But Hannah responded with humility and honesty. "Not so, my Lord. I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord." 1 Samuel 1:15. This scene is powerful because it shows that even when misunderstood, Hannah didn't give up on her faith. She knew her answer would come from heaven, not from the people around her. Hannah's prayer and her bold vow. Hannah's prayer was anything but ordinary. She didn't just ask for a child. She made a bold vow to dedicate her child completely to God. In 1 Samuel 1:10-11, she prayed, "Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life." This is a level of faith and surrender that few people reach. Hannah wasn't just asking for something for herself. She was offering the very thing she longed for most back to God before even receiving it. The miracle and Hannah's faithfulness. God heard Hannah's prayer. She conceived a son and named him Samuel, which means heard by God. But here is the most incredible part. Hannah fulfilled her vow. When Samuel was still very young, she took him to the temple and entrusted him to Eli, the priest, so he could serve the Lord all the days of his life. Now imagine the strength and courage of a mother who, after waiting so long for a child, gives that child back to God. But God, in his faithfulness, didn't stop at blessing Hannah with Samuel. He rewarded her obedience by giving her more children, showing that he never remains in debt to those who trust and honor him. Hannah's story teaches us important lessons. Bring your pain to God. Instead of reacting with bitterness or seeking revenge against Peninnah, Hannah poured out her pain before the Lord. This teaches us to take our deepest struggles directly to him. Pray boldly and with intention. Hannah's prayer was specific, honest, and full of faith. She teaches us to approach God with our deepest desires and trust him to act. Trust God's timing. Hannah waited for years without losing faith, and God answered her at the perfect time. Often God's answers are delayed, but they are never denied. Offer back to God what he gives you. Hannah reminds us that every blessing from God is meant to glorify him. Her surrender of Samuel shows a heart full of gratitude and trust. Reflection on Hannah. Hannah's story is a powerful reminder that God hears our prayers, even when they feel desperate and even when no one else believes in us. Her bold faith and total surrender inspire us to trust that God has a bigger plan, even in our hardest moments. Have you ever faced a moment when you needed to pray with your whole heart like Hannah did? Share how God answered your prayer or how you're waiting for his response. We'd love to hear your story. An ordinary woman in an extraordinary moment. Now let's turn to the story of Jael, a woman who, with remarkable courage and quick thinking, played a decisive role in one of Israel's most critical victories. Jael was not a soldier or a leader. She was an ordinary woman living in a tent. But in a moment of crisis, she took action that would change the course of history. The historical context, a surprising ally. The story of Jael unfolds during the time of Deborah, Israel's judge and prophetess. After Israel's victory over the Canaanite army, led by the feared general Sisera fled the battlefield on foot. He sought refuge in the tent of Jael, the wife of Rahab, a Canaanite. Rahab's clan was at peace with King Jabin of Canaan, Sisera's superior, making Jael's tent seem like a safe haven. However, Jael saw an opportunity to act on behalf of God's people. She made a bold and dangerous decision to take down Sisera herself. Hospitality and strategy. When Sisera arrived at Jael's tent, she welcomed him warmly. In Judges 4:18, it says, Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come, my lord, come right in. Don't be afraid." She offered him milk to drink and covered him with a blanket, giving the impression that he was safe and protected. But this apparent hospitality was part of Jael's plan. She knew that Sisera was a dangerous enemy, and his defeat was crucial for Israel's liberation. Courage in action. After Sisera fell into a deep sleep, exhausted from the battle, Jael acted with decisive courage. She took a tent peg and a hammer and drove the peg through Sisera's head, killing him instantly. Her actions fulfilled the prophecy made by Deborah that Sisera would be defeated at the hands of a woman. Judges 4:9. Jael's courage and quick thinking brought an end to Israel's oppression under King Jabin. Why did Jael do it? The Bible doesn't delve deeply into Jael's motivations, but it's clear that she was used by God to accomplish his plan. Perhaps she saw this as an opportunity to align herself with the God of Israel, or perhaps she recognized the significance of the moment and acted accordingly. What we do know is that Jael risked everything, her safety, her reputation, even her life, to do what was right. Her actions, though shocking, were a pivotal moment in Israel's history. Lessons from Jael's story. God uses ordinary people in extraordinary ways. Jael was not a warrior, but she was in the right place at the right time and acted with boldness. This reminds us that God can use anyone, regardless of their position or background. Courage in critical moments matters. Jael made a decisive choice in a moment of danger. Sometimes, life presents us with moments where quick, bold action is necessary. Trust God's plan even when it's unclear. Jael likely didn't know all the details of God's plan, but she played a vital role in it. Her story reminds us to trust that God is in control, even when we can't see the full picture. Jael's recognition in history. Jael's bravery didn't go unnoticed. In Deborah's song, recorded in Judges 5, she is celebrated as a hero. Most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Rahab the Canaanite, most blessed of tent-dwelling women. Judges 5:24. This recognition highlights how God values the courage and obedience of those who act in faith. Jael's story shows us that even seemingly small actions can have monumental impacts in God's plans. Reflection on Jael. Jael challenges us to be courageous and obedient, especially in unexpected moments. God may call us to act in ways that push us out of our comfort zones. And like Jael, we need to be ready to respond with faith and determination. Have you ever felt that God called you to act in a critical moment? How did you respond? Share your experience in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. A story of redemption and faith. Finally, we arrive at one of the most transformative stories in the Bible, Mary Magdalene, a woman who was freed by Jesus and became one of his most devoted followers. Mary Magdalene shows us that no one is beyond the reach of God's grace. Her life is proof that Jesus not only transforms personal stories, but also redefines the roles and limitations that society tries to impose. Mary Magdalene is not only a central figure in the New Testament, but also a living example of redemption, faith, and unwavering loyalty. Her story culminates in one of the most extraordinary moments of the Bible, being the first witness to the resurrection of Christ, the most important message ever delivered to humanity. Who was Mary Magdalene? Mary Magdalene was a woman from Magdala, a town in the Galilee region. Before meeting Jesus, her life was marked by spiritual oppression. Luke 8:2 tells us that Jesus cast out 7 demons from her. This number symbolizes completeness and suggests that Mary was entirely dominated by spiritual forces before her deliverance. Now imagine what Mary's life must have been like before encountering Jesus. Marginalized by society, shunned, and likely feared by those around her. But then, she met the Master. Her encounter with Jesus changed her life completely. He not only freed her from her oppression, but also restored her dignity, giving her purpose and hope. This act of liberation was so powerful that Mary dedicated her life to following Jesus and even supported his ministry with her own resources. Luke 8:3. Mary's faithfulness in times of darkness. What makes Mary Magdalene even more remarkable is her faithfulness. While many of the male disciples fled during Jesus' crucifixion, Mary stayed. She stood by the cross, witnessing the suffering of the one who had transformed her life. Imagine the pain and despair she must have felt as she watched Jesus endure such a brutal death. And yet, Mary did not turn away. In John 19:25, we read that she stood near the cross alongside Mary, the mother of Jesus, and other women. This act of devotion shows her unwavering commitment to Jesus, even in the darkest moments. The first, encounter with the risen Christ. After Jesus' crucifixion, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb early on the 3rd day to anoint his body, an act of love and devotion. However, when she arrived, she found the tomb empty. Filled with grief, she began to weep, thinking that someone had taken Jesus' body. But then, something extraordinary happened. She heard a familiar voice calling her by name. Mary. This one word changed everything. John 20:16. At that moment, Mary realized she was standing before the risen Christ. She became the first person to witness the resurrection, the cornerstone of the Christian faith. But more than that, Jesus entrusted her with a mission to go and tell the disciples that he had risen. Now think about this. In a time when the testimony of women was not considered valid, Jesus chose Mary Magdalene to be the first messenger of the greatest news ever told. I have seen the Lord. John 20:18. Breaking taboos and redefining roles. Appearing first to Mary Magdalene, Jesus challenged the norms of his time. He demonstrated that in the kingdom of God, there is no discrimination based on gender, status, or past mistake. Mary, a woman once rejected by society, became a central figure in God's redemptive plan. She broke through cultural barriers, proving that God values faithfulness and devotion above all else. Lessons from Mary Magdalene for us. Jesus transforms lives. Mary Magdalene's life went from one of spiritual oppression to being one of the most influential figures in Christianity. This reminds us that no matter how broken we feel, Jesus has the power to restore us completely. Be faithful even in difficult times. Mary stayed by Jesus' side during his darkest hour, showing that true devotion shines in adversity. God uses those whom the world rejects. Society may have overlooked Mary, but Jesus chose her for one of the greatest honors in history. This shows us that God sees value in us, even when others don't. Respond when God calls you by name. Just as Jesus called Mary by name, he calls each of us personally. Are we ready to listen and respond to his call? Reflection on Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene's story is a powerful example of redemption, courage, and purpose. She challenges us to remain faithful, to respond to God's call, and to understand that with Jesus, our past never defines our future. Have you ever felt that God has called you by name, just as he did with Mary Magdalene? Share your experience in the comments. We'd love to hear how God has worked in your life. Recapping the stories. Today, we explored the inspiring stories of 5 extraordinary women from the Bible who defied everything and changed the world. Each of them teaches us profound lessons about faith, courage, and God's ability to use anyone for his purposes. Rahab, a woman who, despite her despised profession, dared to trust in the God of Israel and saved her family. Her faith transformed her life and placed her in the lineage of Jesus. Deborah, a courageous leader who through faith and obedience led Israel to victory in an impossible battle. Deborah showed us that true leadership comes from trusting God. Hannah, a woman who endured years of pain and humiliation, but chose to give her struggle to God in prayer. God turned her sorrow into purpose, blessing her with a son who changed Israel's history. Jael, an ordinary woman who acted with extraordinary courage to defeat a dangerous enemy. Jael reminds us that decisive action and faith can have monumental impacts. Mary Magdalene, a faithful disciple who was freed by Jesus and became the first witness to his resurrection. Her story challenges us to listen when God calls us by name and to share his message with others. What these stories teach us. These women have one thing in common. They didn't let fear or limitations define their lives. They placed their trust in God, even in challenging situations, and through that trust, they impacted generations. And now I ask you, how are you allowing God to use your life? Maybe you're facing circumstances that seem impossible. Maybe you feel unworthy or too weak to be used by God. But remember, God doesn't choose the perfect, he chooses the willing. Challenge for you. Today, God is still looking for courageous people, men and women, who are willing to trust him and obey his voice, even when the path seems difficult. Just as Rahab, Deborah, Hannah, Jael, and Mary Magdalene said yes to God's call, you too can become an instrument of transformation in your family, community, and even the world. Here's my challenge for you. Reflect on the areas of your life where you need more faith and courage. What bold decision is God asking you to make today? Write in the comments how these stories have inspired you and what you feel God is calling you to do. Final encouragement. If these stories have touched your heart, don't keep this inspiration to yourself. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear these messages. And before we close, I want to remind you, God can use the most unlikely people to transform the world. He's calling you for something greater. Trust him, listen to his voice, and be ready to say yes. Thank you for watching. May God bless you abundantly and see you in the next video.